At my daughter's wedding reception, my son-in-law picked up the recipe box I'd spent 3 months restoring and refinishing. My mother's recipe box, the one she'd kept on her kitchen counter for 40 years, held it up to his friends across the room and said, "What is this, a garage sale prop?" The table laughed. My daughter laughed. And that night, my son called me, his voice so tight I barely recognized it. "Mom," he said, "please tell me you still have it. Please tell me you took it home." I did. But what he didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was what I'd hidden inside it. And what happened when they finally found out changed every single one of us in ways I'm still sorting through. Welcome to Bold Mom Stories. My name is Lorraine. No, wait. My name is Cecile Arsenault. I'm 64 years old. I live outside of Sudbury, Ontario, and for 31 years, I ran a small catering business out of my home kitchen, the kind of work that starts as a favor for a neighbor's anniversary and slowly becomes the thing your whole life is organized around. I fed this town at graduations and funerals, and baby showers, and every kind of celebration in between. I know what it means to put yourself into food, not just the making of it, the memory of it. The way a particular smell can reach across 40 years and put you right back in a kitchen you thought you'd left behind. My mother, Cecile, I was named for her. The anglicized spelling, my father's idea of a compromise, kept her recipes in a wooden box on the counter beside the stove. Not a pretty box, a battered cedar thing with a hinged lid and a brass clasp that had gone green with age. She'd had it since before I was born. Inside were index cards, hundreds of them, in her small, careful handwriting, in French and English both, going back to her own mother's time. Tourtière, sugar pie. Butter tarts modified 3 different ways. The kind of recipes that don't exist in any cookbook because they evolved in someone's actual kitchen over actual decades, adjusted for the particular taste of a particular family. When my mother died 5 years ago, she was 83, a good long life. We were grateful even through the grief. That box came to me. It was the thing I wanted most. Not the china, not the jewelry. The box. I spent the next year making my way through the cards, testing them, adjusting them where her handwriting had faded or a measurement seemed off, and somewhere in that process, I started adding my own. Notes in the margins of hers, new cards in my hand tucked in behind hers. A conversation between her kitchen and mine across whatever distance death puts between people. My husband Bernard passed 3 years after my mother. The same year, our son Philippe finally got serious about a woman named Cassie. No, a woman named, I need to get this right, a woman named Tess. Tess Whitmore, from Barrie originally, moved north for work. She and Philippe met at a curling club, of all the Canadians to say. They got engaged 18 months later. And during those 18 months, I tried. I genuinely tried with Tess. She was pretty and organized and clearly loved my son in her way. But she had this manner about her, the way she'd look at my house, at my things, at me, a kind of polite, barely visible assessment, like she was doing a quiet renovation in her head every she walked through my door. Moving things, replacing things, deciding what stayed and what didn't fit the vision. I told myself it didn't matter. People bring their own ideas about what life should look like. Tess had grown up with parents who treated aesthetics like a moral position. Their house was the kind of house that got photographed, the kind of house where nothing was ever out of place and everything matched, and the overall effect was beautiful in a way that made you afraid to sit down. Tess had absorbed that. It was how she was built. I tried not to take it personally, but I noticed when she steered Philippe toward a different style of wedding invitation because mine felt a little dated. I noticed when she redirected a conversation about family recipes because she and Philippe were really trying to eat clean. I noticed the particular silence that fell when I brought homemade things to their apartment, the brief, polite thanks, the way those things never seemed to be out the next times I visited. I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't worth it. Philippe was happy, and happy was what mattered. Then Bernard died. My husband, Bernard Arsenault, was not a man who made a lot of noise in the world. He taught high school history in the same classroom for 26 years. He drove a sensible car. He wore the same brand of flannel shirt for as long as I could remember. He was quiet in the way that takes up more space than you realize, the kind of quiet you don't notice missing until it's gone and the house sounds different. Not silent, wrong. Bernard had one financial habit that I didn't fully understand until near the end. Every year, starting the year we got married, he had put a small amount of money into Canada savings bonds. Not a dramatic amount. $50 here, $100 there, whatever felt manageable. He believed in them the way some people believe in prayer, patiently, without needing to see the results right away. He never talked about it. Wasn't his style to talk about money. I knew the bonds existed the way you know a lot of things about a person you've lived with for 30 years. Vaguely, trustingly, without examining closely. The week before he died, when we both knew, he asked me to bring him the old tackle box from the garage shelf. I'd seen that tackle box for 30 years. I assumed it had fishing supplies in it, or old receipts, or the particular category of nothing that accumulates in a man's garage over decades. It had savings bonds, bundles of them, organized by year in labeled envelopes. The handwriting on the front of the first envelope said, in Bernard's block printing, "For the grandchildren we're going to have someday." I looked at him. He was looking back at me with the clearest eyes I'd seen from him in weeks. "I started the year we got married," he said. "Figured there'd be grandchildren eventually. Wanted them to have something from me even if I wasn't around." I asked him how much. He told me. "I'll tell you what I told the family eventually." It was just over $43,000. 43 years of small patient deposits, growing the way small patient things grow when you give them enough time. Then he said the part that has stayed with me every single day since. "Don't just hand them a check, Cecile. They'll cash it in a week, and they won't remember where it came from. Put it somewhere they'll find it. Tuck it into something they'll keep." He paused. He smiled, his small Bernard smile. "Put it in your mother's box. Let them open it. Let them find it themselves. Make it mean something. Let them find it themselves." That was my husband's last clear instruction to me, and I intended to keep it exactly. So I refinished my mother's recipe box. I sanded it down and oiled the cedar and polished the brass clasp until it shone. I copied out every recipe card in a fresh hand, mine and my mother's both, onto new cards, careful and clean, organized properly with tabs. And in the very bottom of the box, beneath the last section of recipe cards, I built a false floor. Not complicated. Bernard had left plenty of tools, and I'd watched him use them enough times to manage. A thin cedar panel, fitted flush with a small recessed notch you'd only find if you were looking. Beneath that panel, I placed Bernard's bonds, every envelope, labeled by year, and a letter. I'd written it myself because Bernard had asked me to, given me the words in the hospital, and made me read them back. It was addressed to the grandchildren he would never meet, from the grandfather who had been saving for them since before they existed. I fitted the false floor back into place. I set the recipe cards on top. I polished the lid one more time. I wrapped the whole thing in craft paper tied with kitchen twine because my mother's box didn't need a bow to be worth keeping, and I brought it to Philippe and Tess's wedding reception, which was held at a renovated barn venue outside of Barrie that cost more per plate than Bernard and I had spent on our entire wedding. It was beautiful, truly, and absolutely, perfectly not us. I should tell you about that room. It was the kind of room designed to be photographed. String lights and eucalyptus and white linen, and a seating chart that listed guests by their dietary preferences. There was a professional photographer and also a videographer, and also several of Tess's friends who seemed to function as an informal documentary crew. Phones always out, always filming. Tess had been building up to this wedding on her social media for 8 months. The aesthetic was established. The brand, I suppose, was set. I sat at a table near the back with Bernard's sister Henriette. She'd come down from Timmins, 71 years old, and absolutely done with people's nonsense, which I always found comforting, and my daughter Suzanne, who'd driven in from Halifax and who kept squeezing my hand in the particular way she does when she knows something is about to happen before dinner. Tess had wanted it that way. She sat at a decorated table at the front of the room and opened gifts in front of everyone with commentary. The videographer filmed. Her mother, a woman named Patricia, whom I had met exactly 3 occasions, and who had, on each of those 3 occasions, found a way to mention the brand of her kitchen renovation, narrated. I watched the procession of gifts. A stand mixer in a color Tess had specifically registered for, a high-end espresso machine, luggage in a matching set, vouchers for a weekend at a spa in Collingwood. Each one held up, named, appreciated for its brand and its cost. My box was near the end of the table. I watched Tess reach for it. I watched her read the tag, from Cecile, and I watched her expression do the thing expressions do when someone has already decided what something is worth before they've opened it. She untied the twine carefully enough. She lifted the lid. She looked at the recipe cards for a moment, my handwriting, my mother's handwriting, the little divider tabs I'd made, and then she looked up at her husband, at the room, at the camera. "Oh," she said, "a recipe box." There was a small pause. "Did you? Is this homemade?" I said it was. I said it was my mother's box, refinished, and that the recipes inside went back 4 generations, and that there was something special in the bottom if she... But Tess was already talking to the room. "That's so thoughtful," she said in the voice that means these opposite. "Super rustic." She showed the box to the camera the way you'd show something at a yard sale. And then, and I want to be precise here because I've played it back many times, she set it down on the edge of the gift table, not in the main pile with the other gifts, on the edge. Slightly apart, the visual language of a thing that doesn't quite belong. Her mother Patricia said, "Bless, that's sweet, very cottage-y." The table near them laughed a little, the polite, following laugh. I looked at my son. Philippe was standing with a glass of something sparkling, smiling his careful smile. His eyes came to mine for just 1 second, and then he looked away. That was the moment. Not the box on the edge of the table, my son looking away. I did not make a scene. I want you to understand that clearly because what I did was a choice, not a failure of nerve. I sat at my table with Henriette's hand on my arm and Suzanne's knee pressed against mine, and I understood 3 things at once with the particular clarity that grief teaches you. 1. The bonds and the letter were safe, in the false bottom, and Tess had not found them and would not find them now. 2. There was a videographer in the room who had filmed all of it. 3. The right response to this moment was not a scene. The right response was patience. Bernard's whole philosophy in a single word. After the formal program ended, before dinner was served, I walked to the gift table. I picked up my mother's box. I said to no one in particular, "I think I'll keep this for now," and I put it in my bag. Tess saw. She opened her mouth and closed it. She decided, correctly, that pursuing this would not look good on camera. I sat back down and ate the dinner, which was excellent. The caterers knew their business, and I talked to Henriette about Timmins, and she made me laugh 3 times, which I counted as a victory. And then I hugged my son and my new daughter-in-law, and I drove home through the dark on the highway, with my mother's box on the passenger seat and Bernard's life's work safe inside it. I cried when I got home. I cried the way I've learned to cry since Bernard, efficiently and then completely, like getting something out of your system. I held the box in my kitchen, at the table where I'd eaten every important meal for 30 years, and I talked to Bernard the way I do now. "I should have just told them," I said. "I should have explained. But here's the thing about grief. It teaches you patience the hard way, which means it teaches you to wait until you understand what the patience is for." By the time I'd made tea, I knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to hand $43,000 and my husband's last letter to a household that categorized his life savings as cottage-y and sent them on the edge of a table, and I knew what I was going to do instead. I didn't hear from Philippe that night. I heard from my daughter Suzanne, who called from her hotel room, furious in the quiet way she gets furious, the way that is actually more frightening than shouting. "Mom, are you okay? What was in that box?" I know there was something in that box. Suzanne has always known things. It is one of her less convenient qualities and one of her best ones. I told her about Bernard's bonds, about the false bottom, about the letter. I heard her go very still on the other end of the line. "She didn't find it," I said. "I have it. It's fine." "It is not fine," Suzanne said. "But okay. Okay, what are you going to do?" I told her I wasn't sure yet. Philippe needs to know, she said. Philippe will know, I said. Give me a week. I didn't need a week. Philippe called the next morning. Not because Suzanne had said anything. She hadn't. She was keeping her word, but because Henriette had. Henriette, who had watched the whole thing from the back table, who had known Bernard for 50 years, who had known exactly what kind of man saves Canada savings bonds for 40 years in a tackle box in his garage. Henriette had pulled Philippe aside before she left the venue and told him that she hoped he understood what his mother had brought, because his father had told her about the bonds last Christmas in Timmins, and she wanted to be sure someone in that room knew what they were watching happen. Philippe had not known. Philippe, I learned later, had gone very pale, had excused himself from the receiving line, had stood outside in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to do math he didn't want to do. He called me at 8 in the morning. Mum! That's all, he said at first. Just my name in his voice like he was checking I was still there. I said, I have it, Philippe. The box is on my kitchen table. I have it. I heard him exhale, the particular exhale of someone who has been holding their breath since the night before. Henriette told me, he said. Mum, she said, Dad, the bonds. He stopped. How much was in there? She didn't know exactly. I told him. $43,000, the year-by-year envelopes, the letter addressed to his children, to the grandchildren Bernard had spent 40 years preparing for. The line was quiet for a long time. I was standing right there, he said. I was right there and She put it on the edge of the table and I didn't say anything. I didn't say a single thing. I know. I thought. I told myself you'd understand. I told myself it wasn't worth making a thing of it. I told myself. I let him stop himself. There are things a person has to arrive at without help. It was Dad, he said finally. His voice had gone somewhere very young. It was Dad's. He'd been doing that since before I was born. Since before I existed, Mum. And she put it on the side of the table for the camera and You were standing by a wall, I said, at your own wedding, telling yourself that your mother's feelings weren't worth a small moment of discomfort. That's what happened. I know. I'm not angry. You should be. I know what anger costs, and I know what it buys, I said. Your father taught me that. I'm not angry, but I need you to hear me when I tell you what I'm going to do. I told him I wanted the family together. Not a confrontation, a proper giving. What Bernard had asked for. Let them find it. Let them open the box themselves. Let it mean something. We were just going to do it properly, with everyone present, the way it should have happened. Philippe said, I'll make it happen. And then, after a pause, what did she say? Tess. After I left the room, what did she say when she saw you take the box? Nothing worth repeating, I said. But I found out later what she'd said to Patricia, because Patricia had said it to someone who eventually said it to Henriette, who is constitutionally unable to keep information from me. Tess had said, well, how was I supposed to know? She should have put a card on it or something. Who gives a handmade thing to a wedding without explaining it? Tess's first response to learning what she'd dismissed was not regret. It was the search for how it was someone else's fault. I want you to hold on to that because it's relevant to what I decided. I spent the week after the wedding making calls. I have a lawyer in town, a woman named Philippa. No, I need a different name. A woman named Janet Kowalski, who has handled things for our family since Bernard and I bought the house. I sat down with Janet and explained the situation, and she helped me set up a registered as savings plan, and RESP, in the names of Philippe and Tess's future children. The bonds, once cashed, would fund it. Locked, administered through the financial institution. Philippe and Tess could contribute more to it over time, but the initial funds from Bernard were protected, earmarked for education, not accessible for any other purpose, the way RESPs work in Canada. Untouchable, growing. Patient, the way Bernard had been patient. It cost me something to make that call. Not the money, the locking. Putting Philippe at arm's length from his own father's gift. But Bernard's wish had been clear. It was for the grandchildren, not for anyone else. And the cleanest way to honor a wish is to make it impossible to redirect. Then I called my son and told him the family gathering was on for Saturday. My house. Dinner. Everyone, including Patricia if she wanted to come, which she did because not coming would have looked worse than coming. I cooked for 2 days, not to show off. Because some things are best done in a kitchen that smells like it knows what it's doing. They came on a Saturday afternoon. Philippe and Tess, who was wary and careful in the particular way of someone who knows there is a reckoning coming but not its exact shape. Patricia, who came in talking about traffic and didn't stop for the first 10 minutes. Suzanne, who had flown back in from Halifax because she said there was no universe in which she was missing this. And Henriette, who arrived first and helped me set the table and stood at my shoulder the whole afternoon like the sister Bernard would have wanted there. My mother's box sat in the middle of the kitchen table, refinished, polished, solid. Tess looked at it the moment she walked in and then looked away quickly, which told me everything I needed to know about how she'd been thinking about it all week. I made everyone eat first. Sunday pot roast, the recipe on card number 47 in the box, written in French first, and then translated in the margin in my mother's English, which was always more formal than her French. I'd made the tourtière from card number 3 as a starter. I wasn't going to do this on an empty stomach, and I wasn't going to give anyone the excuse that they'd been ambushed before they'd had a chance to settle. We talked about the wedding, about the venue, which had genuinely been beautiful, about the drive up to Barrie, almost pleasant. Tess thanked me for the roast and seemed surprised to mean it, and I thanked her for a lovely ceremony and meant that too. Suzanne and Henriette talked over each other, and Philippe laughed at something his aunt said, and for a few minutes it was just a family dinner. Then I cleared the plates and I sat back down and I put my hand on the box. Bernard asked me to do something before he died, I said, and I promised him I would. I'd like to do it now, properly, the way he wanted. The table went quiet. Tess straightened slightly. Patricia set down her wine. When Bernard asked me to bring him his tackle box from the garage, I said, I thought it was full of fishing things. I want to show you what was actually in it. I opened the box. I lifted out the recipe section by section and set them aside on the table. Calmly, deliberately. Beneath the last section, I lifted the false floor panel. Bernard built compartments, I said. The way he did everything. Small, patient, invisible until you knew where to look. I set the envelopes on the table one at a time. 43 of them, labeled by year, going back to the year Bernard and I were married. I put them in a row across the table where everyone could see. These are Canada savings bonds, I said. Bernard bought them every year, a small amount at a time, whatever he could manage. The envelope he labeled them under says, in his own handwriting, for the grandchildren we're going to have someday. He started the year we were married. He kept it up for 43 years. I let the number settle. They are worth just over $43,000. Patricia's mouth opened. Tess had gone very still. Philippe was looking at the envelopes with an expression I recognized. It was the expression he'd had as a small boy when something had caught him completely off guard, when the world had turned out to be larger or more complicated than he'd expected. And this, I said, lifting the letter from beneath the last envelope, is the last letter my husband ever wrote. I took it down in the hospital. He dictated it and I wrote it out and he made me read it back twice. It's for your children, for the grandchildren he never met, to be open when they're old enough to read it and understand where they came from. I touched the envelope. The outside said, in my handwriting recording his words, to be opened when you're ready. With all the love I had, Grandpa Bernard. Bernard's instruction to me was this, I said. He said, don't just hand them an envelope. Put it somewhere they'll keep. Let them find it themselves. Make it mean something. I looked up and I looked directly at Tess, and I kept my voice as kind as I have ever kept it, which I have learned can be its own kind of weight. That is what you were holding at your reception, I said. That is what you called cottage-y and set on the edge of the table. The room did not breathe. Tess reached immediately for the place where she could be the wronged party. I didn't know, she said. Her voice had a slight edge to it, the edge of someone assembling a defense. There was nothing on the box, nothing to indicate. How would I have known? That's not a reasonable thing to expect someone to know. You're right, I said, that you couldn't have known what was inside. I made a choice not to announce it because Bernard wanted it found, not handed over. That was my choice, and I stand by it. What you could have known, what required no special information, was that your husband's mother had spent time and care on that gift. That was visible. The rest was a surprise. The response to the visible part was yours. Tess looked at Philippe. Philippe was quiet for a moment. Then he said her name. Just her name, in a voice I hadn't heard from him before. Not angry. Steady. Don't, he said. Mum is right. You set it on the edge of the table. I watched you do it and I didn't say anything, and that's mine to carry. But don't make this about what she should have labeled. The silence that followed, that was the best silence I have heard in a long time. Patricia started to say something. I turned my eyes to her, very gently. She thought better of it. Then I told them what I had decided, because I believe in mercy and consequences living in the same house. The money was going into an re-espic for Philippe and Tess's children. All of it. Bernard had saved it for his grandchildren, and his grandchildren would have it. For school, for their start. Not accessible for anything else. Not borrowable. Not touchable. The children's, and only the children's, whenever they arrived. That locks you out too, Philippe, I said. I want you to know I know that. He nodded. He didn't argue. He understood, I think, that he'd earned the boundary. The box, I said, would come home with me tonight. Not forever, until I was confident it was going to a house that knew what it was holding. The letter stays sealed, I said. Bernard's instructions, for when the grandchildren are old enough. But he wrote a small opening, a note for the family to hear the day they found out about the gift. He made me promise to read it aloud when that day came. He didn't know what kind of day it would be. But here we are. I took the smaller envelope from my cardigan pocket. I had been carrying it since the morning of the wedding, waiting, and I opened it. My hands were not quite steady. The arthritis, I told myself. I read. If you're hearing this, Bernard had said, then the little ones have finally come, or are at least on their way. And I'm sorry I can't be there to embarrass everyone by crying about it. I've been putting money away since Cecile and I were married, because the best thing my grandfather ever gave me was the knowledge that someone had been thinking about me before I was born. Before I even existed. I wanted your children to have that, to know that there was someone who loved them in advance, who couldn't wait to meet them, who knew they were going to be worth it, spend the money on something that lasts, and please, whatever house they grow up in, make sure they learn the difference between what something costs and what's it's worth. Their grandmother knows. Let them learn it from her. All my love, from the man who bought savings bonds instead of a boat. Henriette was crying. She's not a crier, which made it worse. Philippe had his forehead on his hands. His shoulders were moving in the way. That means a man has decided it's safe to stop holding something together. And Tess was looking at the box. My mother's box, the cedar one, with the green brass clasp, sitting in the middle of my kitchen table. And I watched something happen in her face that I don't have a clean word for. Not remorse exactly. She's not built for that, or not yet. But recognition, the kind that arrives too late and knows it. I let the room breathe. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said when enough time had passed. I want you to understand that. I did it because those grandchildren are going to grow up in your house, learning what the two of you teach them about what things are worth. And I want them to have this as part of what they know. That there was a quiet man in Sudbury who saved for them for 40 years and thought they were worth it before he ever knew their names. The money is for their future. The letter is for their hearts. And the box, I rested my hand on it, is to remind all of us, including me, that the most valuable thing in any room is almost never the most expensive thing in the room. Tess asked, very quietly, if she could see the recipe cards. I slid them across the table to her. She looked at them for a while. My handwriting and my mother's, the French and the English, the margin notes and the adjustments. She was quiet for a long time. I don't know how to cook like this, she said. It wasn't an apology, but it was true, and she knew it was true, and she said it anyway, and that was something. I know, I said. I can teach you, if you want. She looked up. I'm Philippe's mother, I said. I'm not optional, and I have 40 years of what's in this box. That's the offer. She nodded. A small nod, the kind that costs something to give. Philippe looked at me across the table with his father's eyes, and he didn't need to say anything, and I didn't need to hear it. Here is how things stand now, because I know you want the shape of it. The RIRESP is open and funded. $43,000, sitting quietly, growing, the way Bernard's things always grew. No grandchildren yet, but the account is ready. It will wait. It has time. Bernard thought in decades, so now does his grandchildren's education. The box is on a shelf in Philippe and Tess's kitchen. They asked for it about 2 months after that Saturday dinner. I brought it over on a Sunday afternoon, and Tess had cleared a space for it, a real space, not the edge of anything. She'd put it where the ceramic canister set used to be. Which is not the same as saying she understood everything, but it is the same as saying she was trying. Tess and I make something together about once a month. We've worked through 8 cards so far. She made the butter tarts for Philippe's birthday in October, and he cried a little, which she hadn't expected, and I think that was the moment she started to understand what the box actually was. Henriette came down from Timmins for Christmas and declared the tourtière perfect, which is a word Henriette does not use lightly. Tess went quiet in a pleased way that I recognized. It's the way you go quiet when you've been given something you didn't know you needed. Philippe is different, not completely different. He still avoids conflict the way he was trained to, the way some people avoid heights. But he's catching himself now. He told me in January that he's been trying to notice when he goes quiet to keep the peace, versus when he goes quiet because quiet is genuinely right. He said he's trying to choose rather than default. His father would have had thoughts about that distinction. I think he'd have approved. The box is my mother's, and now it's Tess's, and someday, 1 card at a time, it'll be the grandchildren's. The recipes will have 4 sets of handwriting in them by the time they're inherited. A family in layers, the way families actually are. Bernard bought savings bonds instead of a boat, and he left 43 years of proof that the people you're saving for are worth saving for before you even know their names. If someone gave you something handmade this year and you almost missed what it was, look again. The expensive thing in the room is almost never the real one. That's what my husband knew. That's what I want to leave you with.